All right, let's dive in. Today, we are cracking open the playbook of one of the most powerful and sometimes mysterious forces in the business world, the private equity deal. We're going to deconstruct the whole thing, how they hunt for a company, how they whip it into shape, and of course, how they make their big exit. So let's start with a number it's pretty mind-boggling. $2.6 trillion. That's how much dry powder, cash, basically, private equity firms have just sitting on the sidelines, waiting for the right deal. With that kind of money looking for a home, you can see why it's so important to understand exactly how these guys operate. Now, to put all that cash to work, PE firms have a go-to strategy, a real classic, the leveraged buyout, or LBO. So what is that exactly? The easiest way to think about it is like buying a rental property. You don't pay for the whole house with your own money, right? You get a big mortgage, and then the rent you collect from your tenants pays off that mortgage for you. In an LBO, it's the exact same idea. The company's own cash flow acts like the rent that pays down the massive debt used to buy in the first place. Pretty clever, huh? Okay, so we're going to walk through the entire journey, from start to finish. We'll look at the playbook itself, how they find a target, sealing the deal, the crucial transformation phase, and finally, the big payoff, the exit. First up, let's set the stage a bit. What's really at the heart of this LBO strategy? Why is it the favorite tool in the private equity toolbox? It really boils down to this. An LBO is a powerful financial tool. It helps a firm figure out what kind of returns they can expect from buying a company, fixing it up, and selling it. But maybe even more importantly, it's a test. It tells them the absolute limit of how much debt a company's cash flow can support. Because at the end of the day, it's all about using other people's money, that's the leverage, to juice their own returns. All right, so we get the why. Now for the how. How on earth do these firms go about finding the perfect company to buy when there are thousands out there? Let's get into it. Well, it's really a mix of two things, hunting and fishing. On one hand, you have proactive sourcing. This is the hunting part. They're out there, pounding the pavement, building relationships, trying to unearth those hidden gems before anyone else knows they're for sale. Then there's reactive sourcing. That's more like fishing. They're responding to opportunities that swim by, usually brought to them by investment bankers. The hunting is a lot more work for sure, but it often means you get a much better deal because you're not fighting off a dozen other buyers. So, what does that perfect target actually look like? Well, forget about the buzzy, high-flying tech startups. That's not what they're after. They want something, kind of boring, but in a good way. They're looking for mature companies, the ones with steady, predictable cash flows, a strong management team that knows what it's doing, and a clean balance sheet with not a lot of debt already on it. They're not trying to buy a rocket ship to the moon. They're looking for a solid, reliable engine that just keeps chugging along. Okay, so they've found a company they like. Now what? Well, this is where things get really serious. It's all about vetting the target and getting to that handshake. We're talking deep dive due diligence and a whole lot of legal paperwork. Before a single dollar changes hands, the firm goes into what's called due diligence. And believe me, this isn't just a quick look at the books. It's more like they're buying a used car. They're popping the hood, checking every wire, and literally kicking the tires on every single aspect of the business. So why go through all this trouble? It's simple, really. The absolute last thing you want is to buy a company only to find a bunch of skeletons in the closet later on. A surprise lawsuit, a key patent that's about to expire. Those kinds of gotchas can kill a deal. So this whole process, it's all about one thing, getting rid of as much risk as possible. And all of that vetting and questioning, it culminates in this, the acquisition agreement. This is the legal backbone of the entire transaction. It might look super complicated, but its job is actually pretty straightforward, to write down every single promise, every condition, every what if, so that there are absolutely no misunderstandings down the road. And speaking of details, here's a really important one you'll find buried in these contracts, the purchase price adjustment. And a huge one is what's called a working capital adjustment. In fact, a few years back, 83% of private deals had one. Think of it like an insurance policy for the buyer. It makes sure that on day one, the company has enough cash in the bank to actually pay its bills and keep the lights on. It's a huge deal. So the ink is dry. The deal is done. You'd think it's time to pop the champagne, right? Well, not exactly. For the private equity firm, this is where the real work starts. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. Because what often happens if you don't have a solid plan from day one is that the company's performance actually takes a nosedive right after the acquisition. It's a well-known phenomenon. That's why those first 100 days are so critical. So to prevent that performance dip, these firms hit the ground running with a super strategic 100-day plan. It's like an all-out sprint. The top priorities? Get the cash flow stable, stamp out any risks they've identified, and a lot of the time, rip out old clunky computer systems and put in modern ones so they can actually see what's going on with the finances. All right, so let's fast forward a few years. The firm has worked its magic. The business is running better, debt is down. So what's the end game? Well, it's all about cashing in. It's time for the exit. You see, private equity isn't about holding on to a company forever. It's a get in, fix it up, and get out kind of game. The sweet spot is usually just 3 to 5 years. And you might be asking, why so short? It's because their returns are actually at their peak when the debt is still pretty high. Remember that leverage we talked about? As they pay down the debt, that magnifying effect on their profits starts to fade. And when it comes time to sell, they've got 3 main options on the table. They can sell to another company in the same industry. That's a strategic sale. They can take the company public with an IPO. Or, and this happens a lot, they can sell it to another private equity firm, which is called a secondary buyout. And then the whole cycle can start all over again. Which really brings us to a big question about the future, doesn't it? As game-changing tech like AI starts to shake up every industry, you have to wonder, is this classic playbook still going to work? Or is the key to the next massive payday not just financial engineering, but hiring someone like a chief AI officer to find brand new ways to create value? It just goes to show you, the PE playbook isn't some dusty old book on a shelf. It's alive, and it's always evolving to find that next big score. Something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.